So hey everybody, I think this is just going to be a regular thing doing these little video announcements. So this week's movie is The Exorcist, and this is one of those big ones. Whenever you see, articles about the top scariest films or the biggest horror films of all time, this is always, towards the top. But it's also, I think, kind of now it's become the movie a lot of people then go back to and go, oh, that it's not as scary as they say it is. It's overrated. So I'll be really curious what you guys think, especially for those of you who haven't seen it. A couple of quick things. First off, before I forget, because I didn't make a big deal about it last week, it was kind of an aside. I do want to make sure you guys watch the Siskel and Ebert episode. It's located in the same place that the Exorcist is, so it's just in that folder for films. It's 27 minutes. Again, if you don't know, Siskel and Ebert were the Chicago critics. They worked on competing newspapers. I mean, they were like polar opposites. One was tall, one was short, one was real skinny, one was larger, one wore glasses, one didn't. I mean, it literally was like Hollywood casting. And they tended to disagree a lot, and that was part of the show. It started on PBS as sneak previews, which is what this is an episode of from 1980. Then they went into syndication, and by the 1980s, they were the critics. And so every movie poster, if they liked your movie, they always made a big deal of them showing 2 thumbs up from Siskel and Ebert. And they were around until the 90s, but sadly, Gene Siskel, he's the bald, skinny one. He had brain cancer, and he did pass away, I think, in 98 or 99. Roger Ebert continued. He was the bigger, bad pun, the bigger of the two. He had won a Pulitzer Prize. He was more well-known. He continued for several more years, but he developed, actually, jaw cancer, and he got to a point where he couldn't speak, and then about 10 years ago, he passed away. But there was about a 30-year period, maybe really about 20 years, where they were the movies. And so everybody watched Siskel and Ebert to see if they liked the movies or not. And, now I don't think we're quite in that era of film critics in the way we used to be. I don't think most, now it's bloggers and people on YouTube and stuff. It's not, it's more our reaction than film critics. So it's kind of a bygone, excuse me, it's kind of a bygone era now. But they had a big deal about horror films. And so in 1980, they did this episode where they were highly critical of a lot of the newer horror films, in particular slasher films. Although I don't think they're calling them that at this point. I'm not sure if that title had been used yet for these kinds of films. Anyway, I'd be curious what you guys think about their reaction. Do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? And just to put this in context, we'll talk more on Thursday about this, but this was an era of backlash against a lot of things in U.S. culture, the 1980s. My modern history course, which a couple of you are in, I just did a whole thing about this on this past Tuesday. So this was a time when rock and roll was being highly criticized, violence on television was being criticized, comic books, novels. Stephen King was a typical topic of attack. And sometimes people called this era, especially the mid to late 80s, the Satanic Panic. And slasher films kind of played a role in that. So I'd just be curious what you guys think and to their reaction. In some ways, not to give it away, but I think some of what they're saying in 1980 may have seemed quaint in 1990 or 2000, but kind of post Me Too, and we're kind of in a very sensitive age right now. I think some of the comments might actually seem kind of current. It'd be interesting what you guys think of their comments. Okay. The other thing is Exorcist. This is a movie. It's based on a novel by William Peter Blatty that came out, I believe, in 1971. He was a novelist and a screenwriter, not known for horror. He was a Catholic himself, very religious. And so he wrote this novel partly as a way to critique society at that time, but also really to kind of bring people back to Catholicism. Then the movie came, and it was highly well-reviewed book. It was seen as a serious work. It wasn't seen as a quote-unquote horror novel. It was a bestseller. And then William Friedkin is the director of the film, and I think he co-wrote it with Blatty. He was an Oscar-winning director by that point. The cast was serious actors. So again, this was not seen as a horror film. I guess in modern language, this would have been an elevated horror film. I think that's the current language for serious horror now. And it was a massive hit, but it was also seen as incredibly scary, and it was a movement, if you will. I mean, there was a whole kind of cultural thing around it. If you've seen any kind of possession movie, you've seen The Exorcist, because The Exorcist literally created that genre. In the same way Night of the Living Dead basically created zombies, right? And I mean, again, to this day, 50 years later almost, if possession films still usually involve Catholic priests, they usually involve, it's almost always a young girl. Her body is contorted and she says weird things and makes strange noises. Beds shake, people levitate. All of that goes back to The Exorcist. So keep in mind, this is the first movie to do any of that. So, again, remember we talked about the inability to have those first time shocks. Especially when a movie is 50 years old, because even if you haven't seen the movie, you've seen things from the movie. I think to a large degree, a lot of it holds up, but there are some special effects that are very dated, so kind of look past those a little bit. Again, it is a very serious film, and in fact, I would, really the first hour, I mean, like nothing horrific really happens. I mean, it really is like just a grown-up 70s movie. So stick with it. This movie really scared me as a kid. I'll probably talk about that in class. I've talked about it before in other classes. But I do actually think it's not a pleasant film, but I do think it's a very, very well made and well acted film. So I'd be, again, curious how you guys react to it. But again, it's not a movie of jump scares, and a lot of it is, especially the first half of it is more, psychological than it is, horrific. I do need to give a trigger warning. I mean, there are some pretty rough scenes in it, even if they are dated. There's a scene involving a crucifix. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about when the scene comes up, because even 50 years later, it is still a very shocking moment. The language is very strong. Lots and lots of very crude sexual language, but also very crude religious language, and often putting those two things together. And again, 50 years later, the language is still very, very shocking. So just kind of know that going in. It's not necessarily a pleasant movie in any way or fashion. Okay, enough of that. So one other thing, and I say this on the discussion. This time I actually have a bunch of questions I want you to answer. I really would like you guys to ask somebody who is older, and I won't be able to do this much longer. I mean, I'm 50, and this film came out when I was 1 year old. So obviously I don't remember when this came out. So there, you would have to ask somebody much older than me for this question. But if you can, I would be very curious if this film played anywhere in Southwest Georgia, like in Bainbridge or Thomasville. I know it played Tallahassee. Because again, there were a couple movie theaters in Bainbridge. Unfortunately, I don't have any records of what movies they played. But just because of the subject matter, I'd be very curious. Did this actually play in Thomasville or Cairo or Bainbridge or anywhere in that area? So if you know somebody who may have been alive back then, it'd be, if you could ask them. And even your parents who may be my age, maybe even be younger than me, which is scary. Did they remember seeing this movie? Because even my generation, really the next generation after this movie, this was still a big movie for us when it played on television or when it came out on video. So again, I know your generation, this really is an older film that isn't part of your film language, but it was from my generation. So I'd be curious what your parents thought of it. Anyway, so you got a tiny bit of homework to do for this film other than just watching it. Other than that, I'll see you guys on Thursday. And if you watch this before Monday the 31st, keep in mind that we do have activities on Monday, including a lecture on Halloween, which I think I actually mentioned The Exorcist in that lecture, if you're interested. And that's at noon on Monday. And then also at that time, we got pumpkin carving contest and costume contest and things like that. So I hope you guys are a part of that. Okay, see you guys on Thursday. Bye.